Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Today's the Day Changemakers podcast. I'm Jody Grunwald. This week I welcome my guest, John Belizaire. Imagine being 28 years old and selling your first startup company for $150 million. John doesn't have to imagine that because he did just that. Since the age of 14, selling floppy disks in high school, John has had an entrepreneurial spirit and interest in technology. John talks about a teacher that led him to see that entrepreneurship was something that should be in his future. Before becoming an entrepreneur, though, John was the lead architect for Intel's Digital Enterprise Group. He has gone on to become a versatile CEO and serial entrepreneur who has successfully founded and scaled several more multi-million-dollar technology companies. Today, he is the CEO of Soluna, a company helping to shape the future of renewable energy development. Please read his blog at ceoplaybook.co. See what it's like being a CEO of a fast-growth startup, sometimes a seat that can be a bit lonely. Listen in to hear his response to what footprint he would like to leave behind, and if he knew then what he knows now, what he would tell his younger self. Please subscribe to the Today's the Day Changemakers YouTube channel and stream this podcast on all streaming sites. Don't forget to share these interviews, as you never know who may need the messages that are shared by some of my incredible guests. Go to todaysthedayliveit.com for more information about this podcast and the services provided by Today is the Day. And also like us on Facebook and Instagram at Today is the Day Live It. I'm also the CEO and co-founder of the Zach Giaplotter Kids Foundation, a not-for-profit organization that is making a difference in the lives of children that are living with financial barriers who are looking for an ongoing creative connection through the performing arts. Please visit applaudourkids.org for more information. The views expressed by all Today's the Day Changemakers podcast guests are their own. Their appearance on the Today's the Day Changemakers podcast does not imply any endorsement of them or any entity that they represent. Don't forget, subscribe, like, and share this podcast. You never know who needs to hear the stories shared here. Have a great week, everyone. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Today's the Day Changemakers podcast. I am Jody Grunwald, and as I say every single week, I have the most incredible guests who are changemakers in the world, making a difference every day in the work that they are doing. And today I have John Belizaire with me. Hi, John. How are you?
Jody, I'm doing great. Happy to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so happy that you are here, and I'm so excited to learn more about what you do and what our topic is today. So thank you so much. Before we get started, though, what I always do is I read the bios of my incredible changemakers who are on this podcast. So John, since the age of 14, selling floppy disks, I remember them, in high school. John has had an entrepreneurial spirit and interest in technology. He was a recipient of the Intel Scholarship Program, and he went on to receive a computer science and engineering degree at Cornell University. When he was 28 years old, he sold his first startup company for, everybody listen to this, $150 million. I cannot wait to talk to you about that more. He has gone on to become a versatile CEO and serial entrepreneur who has successfully founded and scaled several more multi-million-dollar technology companies. Today, he is CEO of Soluna, a company helping to shape the future of renewable energy development. His expertise as both a highly effective business leader and technology strategist has enabled his new venture and operational success steering complex initiatives from concept to funding, launch, and growth. Wow, that was a mouthful.
I gotta pay whoever wrote that.
And I always do this, right? I know it may be redundant for the listeners, but I always say to my change makers, when you're sitting on the other side and hear your bio, you're writing it, it's one thing, but to hear it is another. What did you think when you heard me read that?
I was surprised by how much has happened in such a short 20 years. You know, it's amazing how fast time goes and how much you can get done if you're really focused.
Oh, absolutely.
And I wasn't sure that was me. I was like, "Are you sure that's my bio?" You know, but
I am. Yes, absolutely. And that's what's so wonderful is to be able to hear from you how you got to those words on paper now. So we're going to go back first and talk a little bit about young John and where you grew up and your childhood a little bit, and then we'll go into how you decided that you were going to sell a company for $150 million.
No, I'm happy to tell you. I grew up in New York City. I grew up in Brooklyn, And I grew up in the late 70s, 80s in New York, late 80s. So this is the war, I don't know if you ever saw Get Out of New York. But literally it was like, Escape New York was a good explanation of sort of what the city was like. I live in Manhattan now, and it's amazing to just walk around and see how glamorous the city is right now. But back then it was bankrupt, and so you really had to have a lot of grit to live in a city like this. And I think that played a lot on my personality and how I approach things going forward in life. I went to public school, and I was lucky enough in junior high school to go to a brand new school. There were two options from my primary to my middle school. The other middle school was it had a notorious sort of boogeyman story associated with it, with folks robbing you and all sorts of stuff in the hallway. And I got the opportunity to go to a brand new program at a new middle school that was designed to focus on gifted children. And they introduced a whole new set of programs in the curriculum. And one of them was computing. They had a computing facility there. I was instantly fascinated. And one of my professors at the time, or my teachers at the time, noticed my interest and said, if you're really into this, I can give you some extra work to work on. And it started what has become my lifelong focus on technology.
It's so interesting. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and what was fascinating is this teacher was blind. He was legally blind. He walked around the room with a cane assistant, and he saw me, this young kid who seemed to have an interest. And I went from there to writing programs at home. And I remember writing a Hello World text to speech program that in BASIC with the computer that I'd bought from saving up money. And my aunt, who's Haitian, speaks Creole, came into the room, and I said, look, aunt, I just wrote this program. And she said, wow, that's amazing. Now, to impress me, make it say it in French.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, always pushing me further, if you will, so.
That, it's funny because last several changemakers I've interviewed have spoken about a teacher mm-hmm. who has come and changed their life.
Right.
And teachers have had such a tough time recently with COVID and all they've had to endure. And I don't know that all the time teachers, especially with all they have to go through, sometimes really realize the impact, especially when it's so much stress that goes on each and every day in this time. But, one of the things I want to just say to anybody who's listening that is a teacher is that look at the incredible, incredible work of those who are, going through your classrooms. I'm interviewing them. They're all over. Teachers have influenced me. So that's an incredible story. But I also like the whole thing about translated into French. I think that would have been really
exactly.
Yeah. Did you do that? By the way, I'm just curious.
I don't think I did, but it really just sort of, fascinated me. Like, that's a good point. Why can't it do different languages? And of course, we take it for granted that, now Google Translate can pretty much translate, English into any language and vice versa, and can speak it out to you. It's fascinating. And all of that was done using the same technology for the most part that I was working on then, but just way more powerful. It's fascinating. I've always had just an amazing love affair with computing.
Oh, well, that's incredible. You said you grew up in Brooklyn. So did I. What part of Brooklyn did you grow up in?
So I started out in Crown Heights, and then we moved to the Marine Park area, Flatbush area, where my mom still lives. And, I go every Sunday to enjoy family dinner. So, yeah, it's changed a lot. I went to school in downtown Brooklyn, and then later went to college upstate New York. But it's just amazing how much the city has changed. But I love New York, and I've been back now for about 17 years, and I've lived a lot of other places. And so it's great to be back.
Oh, that's awesome. So it's funny because my grandfather had a store for 50 years right on Flatbush Avenue.
Is that right?
Yes.
What kind of store was it? Like
it was a supermarket, butcher shop.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. That's
I
great.
know. So
Still
funny.
bustling area. Flatbush is still a very busy area. A lot more sort of big brands there now, but it's just amazing. And Brooklyn College, which is not too far from there, has really sort of grown too. So it's been part and parcel to it changing, and it's dynamic over there.
Yeah, and I have family in Marine Park, so that's so funny. See, small world.
Wow, very small world.
Totally is. So then, okay, you found your love for computers at that time, and then as you were moving up through school and you were heading into college, what was your thought process about what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Yeah, it's interesting. At the time when I was growing up, my parents were growing up in the world. I think they called it 40 for 40. Your job is to find a profession, and you go and you find that profession, get a degree in it, and work there for 40 years, and then you retire. That's basically 40 hours for 40 years, right? 40 for 40. And when I was getting ready for college, that was really the mentality, right? You had to sort of choose and be clear about what you wanted to do. That was easy for me because I knew I wanted to do computing, and it was really a question of whether I was going into the engineering school at a university or I was going into the arts and sciences school at a university if it had a computing program. And so I chose Cornell. I went to the engineering school and declared my major very early. I wanted to be a computer scientist and do programming and really just be part of this whole new computing generation at the time. And so it's funny when I look back how much clarity I had at the time, sort of what I wanted to do. I also know I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't really know what that meant. I mean, I know I can start little businesses where I sell floppy disks and do typing services for my teachers in high school. But to build a real big enterprise, that wasn't really clear to me. And so I said, let me go into what I know to be big enterprise companies and be part of that growth. And so I got an internship at IBM right before college, and that gave me some real insight. And then I went to school and started studying, and then Intel discovered me along the way, and that sort of put me on this inevitable path, I think, to entrepreneurship.
What would you tell someone who wants to get into this field but really doesn't have that spirit, right? So not everybody has that entrepreneurial spirit. They would love to work for an organization like an IBM or
Right.
an organization of that size. Where do they start, John?
I mean, these days, as I said, it used to be this 40 for 40. What I like to tell young people is it's no longer 40 for 40. There's no job that you can potentially, necessarily keep for 40 years. The way to think about it is careers are more like mosaics. The way you want to think about your professional career is you're building a series of experiences that ultimately define you both personally and professionally. So really what you want to do is if the whole thing is to build this wall of a bunch of different color tiles, just start with one tile. You can pretty much start anywhere. Start with a young company where you might get great entrepreneurial experience because it's a startup and you get to sort of see all the interesting things that happen in sausage making and everything of building a company. Or you can start with a really big company that fits your values and has growth opportunities and real successful people there that can mentor you and build some experience, and then pause 2-3 years in or 5 years in and say, do I really want to still be here? And should I go try something else? And the more you expand the types of experiences that you have and the more diverse they are, the more you get a better sense of what you're going to be passionate about or what you can be passionate about. And the more skill sets you build, making you more versatile as a professional. And those things become the key ingredients into preparing you for entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is really about, finding something you're passionate about, finding a problem that matches that passion, that passion can solve. And then slowly but surely, you don't really have to go pretty fast every day. Just build it from the ground up, 1% every day, using all of that skill and experience that you developed over time. And you'll be surprised how each of those tiles can help you depending on what's happening with the business and how it's expanding and and then you learn a lot of things along the way that grow you, and then you bring other people into the mix with you and build a team, and before you know it, the company or the enterprise or the venture that you're building sort of seems to have a life of its own, and it sort of starts to take things over, and you just become you're just part of the ride after that point, and so I tell people, to answer your question, is just start anywhere.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do this program that I run called When Your Why is Greater Than Your How. Mm-hmm. And when it is, it launches you. But when you start worrying about the how, this podcast wouldn't exist if I worried about the how.
Exactly.
I don't even know technology. You just start.
Yeah, you just start. And to some extent, going through the process of starting and doing it, it's teaching you along the way. And then suddenly it just works. It's fascinating, but very real.
I love what you said, because it is so true. You're just along for the ride. You know that you are in the right place when you realize you're part of a wave.
Exactly.
You created that wave and you are riding it. It's incredible.
And that's when the excitement starts. It's just fascinating. It's like, wow, it's great.
Yeah. And you've had some amazing wows, it seems. I mean, to say that you sold your first company, am I correct on that, for $150 million? So I'm sure, and including me, I want to know, what was that first company, if you could share, and how you got there, right? Because it just didn't all of a sudden happen, right? There was a lot of work.
Yeah. Oh man, such a fun story related to that one. So my first company was called Theory Center. And it was named after a research facility at Cornell that my co-founders and I spent a lot of time in. It was a big NSF-funded supercomputer lab. And we would do all of our assignments there and everything. And it was the three of us, actually. And we always had this drive to become entrepreneurs. We're going to start a company, the three of us, And we wrote a business plan. We were inspired actually by our graduate school professor, who himself was an entrepreneur. He had formed this software company that basically built software that helped computers be more resilient. So if something was going on, it would break down. Another computer would turn on to sort of keep doing the task. And you can use that for big, important applications and financial services applications, things like that. And he sold that company, and then he continued to teach, and he would teach theory and also inspire young people to be entrepreneurs. So we wrote the business plan, and we said, we need a little bit of business insight, because we're just engineers. And so we went to the business school and we said, hey, we want to take the entrepreneurship class over here. And they said, no, we don't. What are you guys, engineers or something like that? We don't. You can't do that. We're like, what do you mean? And so we went back to our professor, our advisor, and he said, and we said, they said, we can't take the class. This is ridiculous. We want to take the class. And apparently some phone calls were made. We got into the class. We didn't know what we were doing. And every time they did use the case method at Cornell Business School. And there were a few of these cases where, we didn't know what to do, but we just went with our gut and said, I don't know, if I was that guy, I would do this, And so he would go around the room, the professor, Ben Daniels, he passed away recently, but he's very inspiring. And he said, so he would ask the business school, students, and they would say, well, they would go through this matrix. If this happens, I would do this. And based on this, I would do that. And then you say, well, what do the engineers think? And then he would turn to us. They were all sitting three next to each other. And we'd say, I don't know. I mean, basically based on that, my gut says he should do this. And then the actual person of the case would come out, and explain what they did. And a lot of times we got the answer right, if you will, quote unquote. Right. So we wrote this business plan, and he basically told us that our business plan was the first that he had seen in a long time that was actually venture backable. And the business plan was to build these really fault tolerant, meaning, resilient computers for running websites, basically. And this was right around the time that email and the web was taking off. And we wrote the business plan, and we started doing all this work to see if we can start this company. And we realized that two out of the three of us, so one of my co-founders was from Argentina, the other one was from Mexico, and they were both here on student visas. So they really had to get a job if they wanted to stay in the country. And so we said, all right, anyway, we don't know anything about business. And, why don't we just forget it, So we told the professor, we're not going to start the company, we're just going to get jobs. And he said, wait a second, no, you have to start this company. And if you don't start it, I'm going to fail you, He said, well, if you fail us, we can't graduate. And so how are we going to start the company? He's like, dang it, you guys are too smart. So we all leave. We go to different routes. I go to Intel. They go up to Boston and actually join a startup. And they ultimately build a deep relationship with two more people. So it's a 5-person co-founding team. It's probably the largest I've participated in. 2 or 3 years later, we do come back and start the company. The business was different. This business was focused more on building Lego blocks, basically. Think of software in the form of Lego blocks that you can use to build e-commerce websites. Think Amazon.com, but for any big business. And at the time, this is 1998, 97, 99, 2000. The internet is, people still scratching their head. What is this thing? Right. And so big banks and large financial services companies are thinking, this is brilliant. I can take my whole banking enterprise to the web. And so we were selling these Lego blocks to these big companies. I literally would walk around with like a Duplo block box, those green boxes, to these meetings. And I'd say, this is the future of software, and I'd pull these Lego blocks out and put them on the table. And they were like, this is fascinating, and how much do those cost? I said, well, these Duplo things, I bought them for like $10. But ours, they're like $1 million, Right. And they were like, right. And we did that many times, and the company grew. We absolutely knew nothing about starting a business. We met every Saturday to see if we can find an idea, and then we eventually would meet in Boston. I'd take days off and fly to Boston and come up with the business plan. And slowly but surely, making lots of mistakes, we learned our way into fundraising, hiring people, building a product, negotiating with customers, and building an enterprise. And one of these large software companies that we had been partnering with out west, a company called BEA Systems, took a liking to us and started working with us out there. And years later, I asked, why did you guys reach out to us, by the way? And they said every time they went to a customer and they would say, how is this going to work with Theory Center? And they says, who the hell is the CEO would say, who the hell is Theory Center? Go find out who they are. And so they did. And make a long story short, it started a courtship that went really fast, and they acquired the business for $150 million. And we grew the business. So we were doing about $15 million in revenue at the time they bought us in late 1999. And within the next 2 to 3 years, we 10x the size. The business grew to $150 million in revenue across 53 countries inside of that company. And so I learned scale and how to build a big business, and lots of things in the process. So that was the first company. I like to say that luck is this powerful force that's just waiting for those who are ready. And I think that was very much the case. We wanted to start a company. We felt sort of invincible at that age, and we just had to get out there and try it. We were literally like, I remember moving from one office to the other, and we put all of our stuff on like the chairs and rolled them out in the street in Boston to the next office, and just kept going, And that's how it all happened. So it was an amazing thing. I'll tell you another great part that I'll never forget is the day after we closed the deal. So we stayed up all night because their company was in California and we were in Boston. We were working the legal docs and everything, and we finished it as late as night. And we stay at the office, just letting it all sink in. And I'm leaving the office, and I think the sun is coming up. And I call my mom. She's in Brooklyn at the house, and I say, "Mom," she's like, "Honey, is everything okay?" "Yeah. We sold our company." She says, "Oh, I'm so sorry." Oh, no, that's a good thing. It was amazing, life-changing for us all. And it just fueled our drive to continue being entrepreneurs.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just, so how long did you have the company for before you sold it?
So we ran it, built it from scratch in 2 years. So we sold it within 2 years for that price. It was a crazy time. So like I said, lightning definitely struck us. And so we got lucky. But we were very prepared. We had really thought through the market and we're prepared for that lightning to strike. That's what I mean. You know, luck is one of those things like that.
Right. And I think that what's amazing to listen to is that you had this teacher, right, who put that in your mind. You need to start, but time went away, right? You moved away from that. You know, they moved to Boston, right? And everybody kind of went their own way, but then the universe is funny, whatever it is you believe in, it brought you back together. So even though if you think, okay, why is this not working right now? Because right now is not the right time. And sometimes we just want to push, but that's when it doesn't work.
That's right. That's exactly right. My mom always says the same thing. She says, oh, well, it just wasn't the right time. There'll be a time, just wait. And so if you're patient, the universe is always listening. That's what I found. And it'll get you what you want, just not necessarily on your timetable.
Right. And we're in the instant gratification, generation, which doesn't happen that way.
Exactly. The world doesn't really work like that. Exactly. It takes time for things to also develop to a point where they're ready to do, what you need. At the time I was talking about building Lego blocks, and, the world, to some extent, we're sort of scratching our head now. I say software is built in components like like Lego blocks, and people say, yeah, and what's your point? It's not new, whereas if I talk about renewable energy and computing, people are like, huh, that's interesting, so it's a whole new exciting area now.
So as we move into that in a moment, it sounds like you like to be at the cutting edge, like right while things are coming. It seems that's what you see, you lean towards, right?
I do. Yeah, you're right. You got a good eye for people. It is a realization that I have, that I seem to gravitate to new sort of big pivots or transformational waves in society that are confluence with technology in some way, right? So the internet sort of catalyzed, hey, the way we do business is going to be totally different, and you're going to need certain pieces of technology, pitches and forks, if you will, for that new future. And my most recent business prior to Soluna was in the insurance software space, and insurance was going through a transformation where they were becoming public companies. They weren't owned by their policyholders anymore. They were owned by big investment banks, and they needed to actually be profitable as insurance companies. Most people don't know insurance companies used to make most of their money by just investing the premiums. Right. They didn't actually need to make money on the insurance. And that changed when technology powered companies were suddenly getting really big, and they suddenly woke up one day and said, we can't be a business like that anymore. And the investment returns aren't good enough. And so we have to invest in technology. And so when that big wave or awakening was happening is when we were joining the industry and saying, hey, we're guys not from insurance. We don't know anything about insurance, but we do know the power of technology. And that wave started there. And then this business, Soluna, is really about the wave of changes in financial services and the wave of renewable energy transition. And so it's very interesting to see that, yes, I'm attracted to these big waves where people scratch their heads at first, and then 10 years from now, they're saying, yeah, of course, that's just the way it works.
Also, you're our teacher, right? That's what it is that, the way I'm seeing it for me is like you're always at the forefront or at leading. So you're teaching others how these things, for lack of a better word, saying the word things, how they can help and assist and make the world better. Right?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. How to rethink and how to look at how the role technology can play in our world at any given time. It changes. And I think that's what's really powerful about technology. I think that's what excited me about computing, is it's so versatile and it's constantly changing, and it can play a role at the right time at any given time,
Oh yes, and for some of us like myself, it's a whole other language, right? So technology and I don't always get along because it's the user error that's the problem.
That's right. Yes, exactly. Sir, did you put the floppy disk in the right location?
Yes, floppy disks. Oh
Yeah,
my
exactly.
goodness, I haven't heard that in a long time. So, and
Exactly.
for those who are younger that are listening, right, that are like 20.
They're like, what's that floppy disk? They're probably typing into Google right now. Floppy disk.
Yeah, and they're thinking of something that kind of like flops around, totally floppy. What kind of disk does that? So,
right.
So you know what we didn't mention, and I do want to go back, and then we're going to get to Soluna. But you said you started a business in high school, and I know we're going backwards here, but with floppy disks. And since you brought that back up, I'm curious to know, how did you start a floppy disk business?
So in high school, they also the high school that I went to was a trade school, and for people who don't know, at a long time ago, high schools actually were professional training institutions that you went to, where after you left high school, you would get a job. So it was designed to give you trade skills that you can go make money on. And a lot of those trade schools joined the New York City public school system. One of them was one called George Westinghouse in Brooklyn. And it had things like, you can learn how to make glasses. It had an automotive shop, and then it had this computing or information sciences side. So I obviously, went into that, and they had this big mainframe and these terminals in the room, and you had to write these programs, these Fortran and so forth. But they would have different classes all the time, so you would have to write your program and then save it on your floppy disk and take it home. So the first one, they would give it to you, big giant black floppy disk. We're going to give you this one for free, but when that fills up, you're going to have to get your own. You can buy them from us. They're $2, or you can go find out, where else to buy them. I'm like, interesting. And then and I studied this, like, where do you get floppy disks from? Like, what, how do you buy this? And then I found this distributor that made them in different colors. And so now all I had to do was see if I can buy a few boxes of them, and then I could become like a distributor and sell them to people in the class. Because most people didn't know, they weren't like geeky like me. And so now, how do I get this money? And so in Haitian culture, in a lot of Caribbean cultures, there's this concept of sort of micro savings, microfinance, where you basically it's probably more like social finance. So you put a group together, call it like 20 people, and everybody needs money for something. So everybody agrees once a week, they'll put money in a pot, and then there's a list. The first person on the pot gets all the money, then the second person, then the third person. And then it's like a way to save money. So I joined that with my brother. And every week when I would, my after school job, I would save some money and I would give him $20, and then he'd take it. And then, everybody puts $20 together. You get $300, $500. And so when it got to me, I went and bought the floppy drives. And the cool thing about this company is it had a model that was different colors. So you can buy yellow, green, blue. And so I was able to sell those floppy disks for $4 versus $2, because, hey, you can't get colors from the school. There's only, and it actually worked. That's how it happened.
Brilliant. And I remember the colors; they were special.
Yeah, they're very special, like red. Like your floppies. It makes you look cool. And
how inventive! Very, very well done, John.
You want to be cool. And I used that money to then buy a larger, bigger computer, which I used to start a typing service. All the teachers that were going back to master's program to get their graduate degrees needed to have their theses typed up. So I sold them a service to do that.
Creativity. You are creative. That is for sure. And I think that people who think, oh yeah, I could try this and maybe this will work, and then they're like, nobody's going to. That's exactly what I thought about. Who's going to watch the podcast? Who's going to want to
exactly.
And then I get to interview incredible people.
There's only one way to find out if it's going to work, and that's to do it.
Exactly. So now, current day, you are at Soluna. So before we get into Soluna, let's talk about what renewable energy is for us novices Go ahead, explain that.
So every day you get up, you plug your iPhone in, you turn the lights on. If you've got an electric service on your stove, you're cooking dinner and everything, and you just sort of take for granted that electrons flow through the wires in your house or your apartment, And they're just, I mean, you pay for the you pay for them, but you don't really understand where they come from. And the reality of it is those electrons come from a large grid infrastructure, those power lines that are sort of sending electricity to your neighborhood. They flow backward into a whole network that crosses the entire country. And part of the network is connected to the homes and buildings and businesses. And part of that network is connected to power plants that are actually generating that electricity to send to your homes. And then the grid operator, the large sort of, national suppliers, make sure the lines work and the power gets to you, and everybody has nice, smooth power. And in certain countries, that works really well. And so the power is always on. There's never any weird brownouts unless there's a crazy storm. And in other countries, it doesn't work so well. It's a little browner sometimes, and sometimes at night you have no power, and that's sort of the way it goes. Now, if you look at those power plants, most of them today are powered by fossil fuels. They're coal plants. To some extent, a lot of them have become gas-fired plants as well. And those plants are built specifically designed to provide exactly the amount of power that the grid or your neighborhood is going to need. So if your neighborhood uses, just using units for discussion, 100 units of electricity, that power plant is built exactly to deliver 100 units of electricity to your neighborhood on a continuous basis. Now, over the last few years, we've been moving away from fossil fuels because it's just not sustainable. It's adding lots of CO2 to the atmosphere and causing all sorts of climate issues, whether you're on the climate change side or not. Doesn't matter. The point is, these power plants are not good for your health and or the health of the planet. And so there's been a big movement, lots of investment, lots of new law changes to replace those power plants with cleaner, greener power production systems. So think a power plant that's not fired by coal, but it's powered by the sun. So a huge solar farm sits somewhere out in Texas and is connected to the grid and sending power to neighborhoods and facilities in Texas. The problem is the sun is only up for a few hours of the day, and therefore that power plant can't really provide that much power to the grid after a certain hour. Think about a power plant that's a wind farm. So huge turbines in big prairies out in Oklahoma spinning as the wind is blowing, during the day or at night. They are able to generate electricity and send it in and through the grid. Now, here's the problem. The more you add these renewable energy power plants that aren't controlled by the grid anymore, they're actually controlled by Mother Nature. When the sun is out, it can produce electricity. When Mother Nature decides to blow wind appropriately, we'll get power. We have power, but when she's not interested in that, we don't have power. And so now you have this system that was designed to deliver electricity to you in a very balanced way is no longer balanced. It's kind of uncontrollable to some extent. And that creates all sorts of challenges to the grid as we transition from fossil fuel plants to green powered or clean powered plants, because those plants are more what's called intermittent. Sometimes they're on, sometimes they're not. And so how many of those do you need versus the old plants? So you make sure the light's always on when you flip the switch, right? Does that make sense so far?
Oh, you're doing great. I'm on the road with you. It's great.
Okay, great. So now imagine there's a lot more of these green plants, right? So as you replace one, synchronized power plant with that legacy fuel, that dirty fuel, with more of these coal-fired or less sustainable facilities with green facilities, this problem, this imbalance problem starts to become a big challenge. And so sometimes you'll have a wind farm that wakes up at night and just starts blowing, these high winds at night. And suddenly there's a lot of electricity being produced, but everybody in Oklahoma is asleep. So that power is being wasted, and it causes all sorts of issues for the power plant owner, causes financial issues. it makes it harder for the grid to put more of these plants, because you might have power be, wind blowing, in the north part of the grid, and solar coming on in the south part of the grid. Then you've got the coal plant. Now you have too much power or too little power. And so you have all these issues in the imbalance of the grid. And so as a result, you have lots of wasted energy. In fact, by our calculations, sometimes a power plant that has had hundreds of millions of dollars spent to build it, some of these renewable power plants, up to a third of their power could go unused, never makes it to the grid. It actually just gets turned off. So the grid signals to the power plant, please turn off, because I just can't, I don't have any place to send your power. And our grid is fairly old, very brittle, and it's not very ubiquitous. Like, it's not everywhere, right? So you can't take power that's being produced in Oklahoma and send it to Atlanta to power like a COVID coming out party or something like that, because there's just no lines to get it there. So so as a result, it's harder and harder to get to our green goals, because we just can't keep putting more power plants on, because they are unprofitable, basically. So what we've found is, what if you could do something different? What if you could have a demand for the energy that would wake up when there was excess energy? So now imagine you've got the grid, you've got houses, you've got businesses and so forth using the power. You've got some old dirty plants, and you've got a lot of new green plants, and those green plants are causing all this excess energy to hit. And what if also on the grid, you added these really smart, flexible data centers that are actually placed right at the power plants where that excess energy is going to be. And when there's excess power, the grid actually signals, or the power plant signals the computing facility to wake up and come on and eat that power. And we're able to consume that wasted energy. And then we turn that wasted energy into computing. And so we use it for a host of different types of applications that are becoming much more prevalent these days. Just about everything we do has some sort of AI behind it, or machine learning behind it, or crypto security behind it. And so what our facilities do is they perform those types of computing, which are easily paused. So if I'm trying to figure out, for example, what movie I should show you on Netflix next, and there's a computing facility somewhere out there that's running this model to do that, you can pause that for a moment if there's no power, or the power is not sufficient. And then I'll just show you the movie that you need. I'll update your model tomorrow, and the next time you log in, you'll get some new feeds. So we do that as a way to absorb this excess energy. And by absorbing this excess energy, the grid can absorb more green energy. So the more you have this sort of buffer to do that, the better. Now, some people might say, well, John, wait a second. Can't you just store this power? I mean, there's batteries, right? Like, why don't you just put giant batteries on the grid? Well, that is a really good point. There's technology to do that. There are batteries that you can put on the grid. But what people don't know is most batteries are actually companies. They're businesses too. So what the battery does is you put a big battery system on the grid. And when there's excess power, usually the price of power is fairly cheap, because there's more supply than demand. And so the battery will absorb that excess energy, it'll store it, and then it will sit there and wait until there's a difference in the supply. There's more supply. There's more demand than the supply. And so the battery wakes up and says, oh, the prices are higher now. I'm going to send that power to the grid. And what happens is now the battery becomes like a power plant, and it actually exacerbates the problem by putting more power to the grid, because it has to wake up and discharge at some point. So that makes it really hard. And the cost of batteries is so high that if you were to build a battery big enough to solve this problem, it just would be cost prohibitive to do that. So the costs just haven't come down. The other thing people might say is, well, John, why can't you just move the power? Well, I alluded to it earlier that, well, it's really hard to do that, because you have to build these big power lines that are going to carry, this electricity from the middle of the country to the edges of the country. and it has to be a super highway, and it has to cross many states. And you now have to convince each state and people in these states that you're going to put this power plant on their land or their farmland. And you're saying, and this is the conversation with the farmer, right? So what you're telling me is you want to put this thing on my land, and I don't know what kind of environmental thing that's going to cause for me and my family, and I don't even get to use the power.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not even coming to my state, is going past my state. That causes all sorts of challenges and takes a long time to build. So those are solutions, and they will be part of the solution to getting more renewables on the grid and making the grid more flexible. There's lots of initiatives underway to get those things to become better parts of the solution. But in the near term, computing is scalable. It's available today. Everybody needs computing on a global basis. What we're doing can be done anywhere in the world, and we can place computing on the ground, which allows more renewables to be built. The reason I became really passionate about this, Jody, is we started out, actually, Soluna started out as a power plant company. We were building a big power plant in Morocco, and there was no grid. So we're like, oh my goodness, where's the power? Now, my earlier example, like the power plant is connected to the grid, but the grid just can't do anything with the power. Imagine there's no grid. So we figured out that what if we just had a computing facility there that was a data center, and it would buy the power from our own power plant and then turn it into computing that people can use globally. That would be a way to finance it. And as we were developing the project, the grid did arrive there. And so we started imagining, hey, we could use the computing in this new way where it's more like a battery type of experience. I like to say computing is a better battery. But while I was in Africa, touring Morocco, where our power plant was, and other parts of the continent, it became clear to me that Morocco and Africa and other countries on the continent are very starved for power. Remember, I talked about how we enjoy, nice bright lights, and everybody in some other parts of the place are brown. You'd fly over the continent, and they're at night. And, when you fly over New York, it's like these bright gleaming lights, and over there it's dark. And so power has a direct relationship with the economic growth of any area, or, across history. And these countries find it very difficult to expand and really become part of the global economy because they have no power. And the reason is because grid infrastructure is limited. The power plants are really far away from where you would build power plants, are really far away from the grid. And the economy isn't big enough to support selling power, at the levels that they would need.
Right.
And so if you build a power plant, there's going to be a lot of excess power in that power plant. So it doesn't make financial sense to make the investment. But if you built that power plant along with one of our data centers, our flexible data centers, now you can build more power plants in harder to build areas of the world. And therefore, you'll have more green power on a global basis. So we like to say, Soluna makes possible low-cost green power at a local level and low-cost green computing at a global level.
Wow. Well, thank you for making this understandable.
Did that make sense? Because sometimes I just ramble. I don't even know.
No, but you know what? Obviously, I am not the math person. I'm not the engineering person. That is not me. But I think what's so great is that you are able to explain it in a way that us novices around this can absolutely understand, but also your passion in it and what it means to you, you can totally see. And so that also brings, us in who are listening too, because you're so excited about it and passionate about it.
No,
so how long have you been at Soluna?
So our company is 4 years old. We started it back in 2018. And as I said, it was initially focused on power development and computing sort of as a vertically integrated thing. And then about a year and a half ago, we came up with this new idea, which is to take the computing and go to existing power plants to solve the problems that they have. And we've been doing that for about a year and a half, and it's probably the fastest growing segment of our business. And it grew so fast, and we built such a big pipeline of projects and partnerships with big power plant owners and some of the largest infrastructure funds in the world that are responsible for building, out the grid of the future, if you will. We've partnered with, and it's just really exciting. In fact, we announced the acquisition of the company this past summer. And so Soluna very shortly here will be a public company. We merged with a public company called MTI Technologies. And Soluna will be sort of one of those companies you can invest in and just watch us grow. And it gives us great access to the capital markets and so forth. And it was just the right timing. Back to my point about luck again, how the world is sort of changing. Everybody, COVID happened, and the climate became a big focus, and suddenly, people weren't traveling and moving around and riding buses and flying on planes. And so there wasn't a lot of need for energy as much as it was before. And so this problem became more, prevalent and more acute for a lot of players in the space. And we were starting to talk to people about this new idea that we had right at that right time. And all of a sudden that turned into a exciting new business for us. And that's our focus from here going forward.
Sounds like you get a lot of nudges along the way and you just follow them,
Indeed. Yeah, indeed. You get these insights, and your gut just says, I think we're onto something here. And, to be honest, since we couldn't travel as a team in 2020, we took some real time and spent that extra time just working on strategy and saying, what have we learned and how can we use that to, expand the business going forward? And one of the questions we asked was, do we have to build a power plant every time for this to work? And the answer was actually no. There's probably this problem all over the place. We weren't sure. And so we started calling people and saying, do you have this problem? And I said, do I have this problem? There was actually one call we did where the gentleman we were talking to, he's responsible for managing a whole fleet of solar farms around the country. And it was a Zoom call, and he says, can I present? And he brought up this slide that he presents to senior management all the time, where he shows the revenue they're supposed to be making from their power plants and the revenue they are making from their power plants. And he says, see that gap, that big gap right there, John? That's the problem you just described. And we were just blown away. And it's just like, when you hear that, we're onto something here.
Oh, majorly. That's totally incredible how, and I love that the story you continue to grow from the story prior and your organization now. So how large is your organization?
So we're just getting started with our new team. We're about 30 people, and we're growing. We're hiring for folks out there that are excited about getting into renewable energy and technology. Come check us out. solunacomputing.com. Lots of career opportunities there, and we're going to be building these facilities all over the world. We're talking about gigawatts of these facilities where we're absorbing. Our goal is to get wasted renewable energy to zero, right? So there's no waste in the world. And the more we do that, the more renewable energy we can put in the world. And so we're just sort of on a growth path right now.
Well, I definitely have faith that you're going to figure it out, because I'm so passionate about it.
Oh, thank you.
So I want to know, so long term in your mind, what do you have this big dream of what you want to accomplish in your life, your biggest footprint that you'll leave behind?
Oh, man. So it's funny you asked that question, because 2020 was a challenging year for me. And I'm sure for a lot of the people listening, it was also challenging, right? We suddenly went from, being highly connected to our families and friends and so forth. And then suddenly became very isolated, and that can have very catastrophic, mental health challenges and so forth. And I went through sort of my mom almost dying from COVID, and a very close friend of mine passed away, and it really changed my whole perspective on life, and it reminded me of how short-lived life can be, and how important it is to be present and to really connect with what you're doing and your family and so forth. But coming out of that, I really used that experience to sort of drive my own personal growth. And I sat down. I asked my wife for forgiveness. Said, look, I'm not going to be able to change diapers. this week. I just need a few hours. I need to write this. And I sort of wrote this personal mission statement. And in it, I sort of described, when I'm 80, what do I want people to say about me? I want people to say that this person has high integrity. He is generous. He really lived life and loved his family. But I also wrote in that statement that I want to leave behind a legacy of 1,000 entrepreneurs that look like me. I really want to inspire young people who are getting started with entrepreneurship, who are afraid about how to go about it and really are lost for mentorship, to really give them a guide. So I write a lot of my musings about my learnings on a blog. You can find it at ceoplaybook.co. And in these articles, you'll find really funny stories that I write about things that I've experienced and what I learned from them, and how they sort of give you insight into what it's like being a CEO of a fast growth startup, and how to deal with that and grow in a seat that can be very lonely. And so I have become more passionate about, in my spare time, advising young entrepreneurs. And that's what I see myself doing, after I'm tired of building companies, helping others build companies.
Well, I think that's incredible because of the fact that someone gave you the spark, right?
Exactly.
And now you're igniting the spark in others. And
Yes.
that is what an incredible legacy that is to leave behind, because not everybody thinks about what they're going to leave behind, right? Because again, some are living in the moment, or we're not even thinking about the moment. We're just kind of on cruise control is what I call it. You don't even realize that life is passing you by.
Indeed.
But the fact that you can help, support others who may want to be ready, but don't feel ready.
Yeah.
And give them that encouragement is incredible.
That's right.
So super kudos to you on that.
Thank you.
And so I'm going to ask you the last question. I could talk to you for hours, by the way.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
No problem. And I want you to come back. I hope you'll come back and you'll give us an update on what's going on.
I will. Happy to do it. Yeah.
Awesome.
Happy to do it.
MTI, we definitely want to learn more once you go public. But my last question to everybody, and for this year, I'm asking every guest the same question, and I'm putting out a book. I'm writing a book from everybody's answers, because
wow. All have, that's great.
All incredible insight. And my hope is to do exactly what you're doing, right? The question is, if you knew then what you know now, what would that be? And so I'm trying to inspire some of those, whether they're young or old or whatever age, to understand the learnings from all of the incredible change makers on the show.
Oh, man. So my list would include read a lot. I wasn't a big reader, actually. I think I just read slowly. So I always felt like it took me forever to finish the book. So I was more like a read magazine guys on the plane, watch science shows, stuff like that. I'm always a curious person. Right. But a few years back, I found this technique to overcome my Achilles heel, if you will, on the reading side. I buy for those of you out there who suffer from this, I buy the book and the audio book. And I play the audio portion. I read the book, but I play the audio portion at a little higher speed. And what I find is that because I ran a company remotely for a long time, my ears became really good at processing lots of information. And so when I read it at that higher speed, I found that I got through the book faster because I was able to read it, and it stopped me from sort of replaying the words in my brain, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so I get through lots of books now, and I read a lot of books about failure. People who have built companies, and not just the successes. You can learn a lot from the successes, but I read also a lot about companies that were not successful, and I learn from how they learned from their mistakes. And I think that's really important as well. I would add to my list how important travel and the importance of culture is. I was fortunate to do that, and I wasn't sure at first, but then once I started doing it, I learned how important it is to understand cultural differences and how they affect how people interact with each other, the assumptions they make. And I think that has a just a real fascinating insight into why people behave a certain way. I also learned how similar people are. It's the cultural differences that really give you insight into the similarities that we have. Right, everybody has the same drive. They want to be happy in life. They're searching for their passions. They're dealing with the demons of sort of their identity and dealing with issues in their past. In just about every culture, you have that. Everybody's trying to find some definition of spirituality and what that means to them. And so I've found that having insight into those cultures is very important, and you can get that from reading too. The other thing I would tell myself is never give up. Basically, you have to keep pushing. So one door closes, another door opens. Push the other door open. But you have to keep pushing. Whatever you're working on, just keep pushing, because that failure, when you hit a wall or you have failure, that's information. That's not a endpoint, is the way to think about it. It's just new information that tells you whatever you were doing just there, that didn't work. Try something else, or try it with a different target. Like maybe the person you're talking to is the wrong person. You should be talking to someone else. So now I actually look for failure. I actually look for it so that I can grow and learn, because that's where the growth is. I try to teach my team, like, oh man, they're like, this is going to be really hard. And I'm like, yeah, we're going to learn so much. We're going to make so many mistakes. It's going to be great. And they're like, what are you talking about? It's like, no, we don't want to make mistakes. Like, no, we want to make a lot of mistakes so we can learn. And as long as we can learn very fast, that's going to drive and catapult our success, and so that's really important. I'm trying to think how, the other is take time for solitude. Take time for solitude. I think it's so important to whatever you're doing. It's so all consuming that you actually lose yourself in it to some extent. And it makes it harder for you to put things in perspective, to process learning, to rekindle connections. So you should just go someplace really far away where there's like no cell phones, no one can reach you, and just be alone with your thoughts for a moment. And it's going to be scary for like the first hour, like, oh my God, this is, and then eventually you're like, wow, this is fascinating, And if you have a book with a lot of empty pages, write down what you're hearing, what you're seeing, what you're experiencing. And then that's where all of your growth happens. So I always tell CEOs to find solitude. That's why Superman goes to the fortress of solitude, because he needs to like process all his superpowers to some extent. But that, to some extent, we all need to do that. And that's actually how we learn a bit more about what our superpowers actually are. So that would be my short list. I could probably keep going. I've learned so much.
It's a great list, John.
Thank you.
So true about the solitude piece. And I know, we're so addicted to our phones that without it being in our hands, we feel lost. But when you do put it down and I've done this, and it's hard. Yeah. It's very hard, but It is great to go and take a book or go and journal what you're thinking about. And the creativity sometimes just flows if you can get rid of all of the noise from the phone, right?
It's amazing. Yeah. And it's unfortunate that, as a technologist, we've created this technology that has sort of moved us further and further away from being present and being connected to ourselves and our emotions and our thoughts. It's kind of sad, actually, because we then seek that because we're humans. We need that. So we get it from the social media platforms. We get it from, adulation or from others. And we forget that a lot of what we need is just inside of us. We just need to spend some time with ourselves. That's simple.
So true. So true. And such a good way to end our episode today. I think that's what we're going to tell everybody. Their homework assignment is go spend some time in solitude.
Yes. Go for solitude. Do it.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Learn about yourself, and then you can reconnect with everybody when you connect with yourself.
Exactly.
So definitely come back. I would love to have you back.
Thank you. I'll be happy to be back. And thanks so much for having me, Jody. This was great.
Oh yeah, this was great. I'm so glad we met, and thank you so much for your time and sharing your story. So I'm gonna say what I say at the end of every podcast. My mantra is: today is the day. You cannot go back to yesterday, and you do not yet own tomorrow. So what steps are you going to take today to get yourselves just a little bit closer to your goal? They can be small or large. Have a great day, everybody. See you next week.